Oh my gosh. It has been a crazy 24 hours if you are a Nintendo Switch 2 fan, because there has been news left and right, not to mention so many rumors coming out about a potential Nintendo Direct, not to mention Nintendo might have accidentally leaked one of their big updates for a Switch 2 game that could be mentioned in a upcoming Direct. We have a lot of things that we need to talk about into this video, and I don't even know where to start. But lock in and get ready, guys, because we have a lot to talk about. Okay, I guess we should start off with one of the bigger things first. And honestly, I don't think this is too much of a big deal because it's kind of like the most obvious thing. But it's being reported by people like Switchforce and even Nashweedle, which, funny thing about Nashweedle, guys, I am blocked by Nashweedle on Twitter. If you guys don't know, he's somewhat of a leaker who sometimes gets things right and sometimes get things wrong. And I called him out on one of his Nintendo Direct dates for July and how, wow, this credibility just whoop, because he was like, yeah, this Nintendo Direct's either gonna happen the second, third, or fourth week. I'm like, dude, you just said that it was gonna happen then. Now you're like, it might happen this week or next week. I called him out on it and he blocked me on Twitter. It was the funniest thing ever. But we have a lot of people reporting that a Nintendo Direct is on the way. But I feel like it's one of those things that's very obvious that is clearly on the way. September is something that Nintendo always typically does a Direct for. I more predicted it would happen in October, but it's looking more likely in September. Switchforce has had a track record of being right, but I still think that this is something that we all need to really just put a pause on, and it's gonna happen. We just need to wait. But Switchforce is saying a date of September 12th, which is a Friday. That would be very weird and very unlike Nintendo for them to do a Direct on a Friday, because if you looked at Nintendo's history, they typically do Directs either on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. So very weird from Nintendo if they decide to do a September 12th Direct. Not to mention, they're also talking about a Mario Direct happen, which is something we talked about a few weeks ago where I was predicting what would happen in a Mario Direct. This makes sense, but it seems like they're hinting that this Mario Direct could happen actually before a regular Nintendo Direct. Point of the matter is, I don't think we should really care about these rumors about a Direct because it's obviously going to happen at some point, and we're at that point where people are going to be saying, oh, if the Direct's not this week, it's going to happen next week. And if it's not next week, it's for sure going to be the week after. Don't put too much into this. As I said before, we have plenty of other exciting stories to talk about. As I was recording this video, Charles Martinet might have accidentally said something. I think it was an obvious mistake, but Charles Martinet was talking about how he can't wait to meet fans in Tokyo on October 4th and 5th at the Nintendo Direct. Now, what he meant by this is that there's a Nintendo Live event happening in Tokyo October 4th and 5th, where he's doing meet and greets for. He probably got that confused as in a Nintendo Direct, as this whole Nintendo Live thing is something that Nintendo's starting to do more of. So this is just a very big confusion on his part. There's not going to be two Directs right beside each other like that. That just does not make sense. And why would they do Charles Martinet meet and greets for a Nintendo Direct? This was just a mistake on his part, but everyone's going crazy over it. All right, our next theme comes from Monolith Soft, to where they might have accidentally leaked a big announcement of their own, and that's regarding Xenoblade. Now, I think everyone has been asking for the Xenoblade series to have a big Nintendo Switch 2 update to happen, especially with Xenoblade Chronicles X, as that game just came out this year, and it just feels like it would have made sense for there to be a Switch 2 edition of the game, especially considering the fact that it's been found into the code that there is a 60 frames per second mode into Xenoblade Chronicles X, but obviously the Switch 1 doesn't have that. So you would have thought that the Switch 2 would have unlocked that 60 frames per second, but that has not happened yet. But what ended up happening is that Monolith Soft was talking about how they were wanting to hire employees for upcoming games. And they showed a clip of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 because they were looking to hire someone that can do what this Xenoblade Chronicles 2 clip showed. But what's interesting about this Xenoblade Chronicles 2 clip that's being played by Monolith Soft is that it's definitely different than what we see on the Nintendo Switch 1. Someone on Twitter went ahead and compared both the Switch 1 footage and this footage that they showed into this tweet, and it's very different. In all honesty, the Switch 1 version I think looks a little bit better. The lighting and everything is definitely different, but it's overall a very different clip, which is having people wondering, did Monolith Soft accidentally show a Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Switch 2 update into this footage? Which would make a lot of sense, as I feel like Xenoblade Chronicles is definitely a series that is going to get Nintendo Switch 2 updates, especially as we talked about before. The Chronicles X update seemingly is there. They're just waiting for it to happen. And one of my theories with Nintendo Directs going forward since the Switch 2 is that they're going to have a little bit of a highlight reel showing things that are going to happen to Switch 1 games, kind of like an update reel essentially. I feel like every Nintendo Direct is going to have shadow drops of Switch 2 updates to Switch 1 games. And I feel like Xenoblade 2 might be at this next Direct whenever it's supposed to happen. I think this is going to be a new trend for Nintendo to show updates to all their upcoming Switch 1 games over to Switch 2, and obviously I don't think they're going to make a Switch 2 edition of these Xenoblade games. I think these are just going to be free updates, as we've already seen Nintendo do free updates in the past with Switch 1 games. Overall, this was very interesting and very funny that Monolith Soft might have accidentally leaked their own game through a hiring post, but yeah, very funny story. And it could just be them doing a filter over this. This might not lead towards a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, but I definitely think it's interesting and something that should be pointed out. So over at Gamescom, Digital Foundry actually asked developers about the Nintendo Switch 2, and more importantly, about the dev kits for Nintendo Switch 2. Now, if you haven't been catching the news on dev kits, it's been said that a lot of developers have not been able to get a developer kit for the Nintendo Switch 2 until really more recently. And even then, still people are not able to get development kits, which is what's going to have a lot of third-party games come later into the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, reportedly what's been said about this is that Nintendo purposely did this because they didn't want people to leak the Nintendo Switch 2, so they waited till way after the reveal to have developers have development kits for this system. But I think this was probably one of the stupidest decisions Nintendo could have made, as the Switch 2 already leaked, so I don't know why they made this choice. But it's coming to bite them because there's so many developers that want to put their games onto this system, and now there's like a queue to get a development kit to develop your game for this system. Overall, it's a giant mess. It's also pretty disappointing to see Nintendo do this, because I feel like one of the advantages of the Switch 2 is that people already believed in Nintendo when it comes to these third-party companies. Because if you followed the Wii U history, a lot of third parties were just done with Nintendo. And with the Switch 1, they were very skeptical, and companies didn't become on board on that system till like 2018. Where we hear without the system coming out, people were already on board and wanting to put their games on it. And this would have helped Nintendo overall have a giant third-party library consistently coming. So it's now kind of following the trends of the Switch 1, which I just think is not the right move from Nintendo. We also got more Digital Foundry news here. They actually had the chance to play Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we talk about Digital Foundry sometimes because they're very critical about the Nintendo Switch 2. If you followed our videos before the system even came out, they were talking about certain things about the system that just wouldn't be possible, and they ended up being wrong. But here we have them actually giving compliments to the Nintendo Switch 2 hardware, which is pretty surprising, as they said that Final Fantasy VII Remake was one of the best games that they ever played onto the Nintendo Switch 2, and that they were heavily surprised by the locked frame rate behind it. I think they did a dedicated video, so it's definitely one to check out, but it's cool to see Digital Foundry come out and say, yeah, this is actually a really good version of the game. I also think they said that they think that this version of the game is going to fall in between the middle of a PS4 and PS5 version of the game. And I also noticed that they talked about it being in 30 frames per second, but I think what was reported at Gamescom is that people was actually playing it at 40 frames per second. But I guess we're never going to know, since it's kind of hard to tell that stuff without having footage of it, as footage has been really locked behind closed doors, and if you get footage, it's just through a phone. Now we have an update. Now I'm a little bit late to this, but I wanted to put this into a video as we did a dedicated video on it, and that is Elden Ring. Elden Ring was reportedly running very bad onto the Nintendo Switch 2 at Gamescom because they were only playing it in handheld mode. Since then, there was an event in Canada, Fan Expo Canada to be exact. They had Elden Ring there in docked mode, and you could tell that Elden Ring was not the disaster that was reported. It actually looked pretty solid. It definitely had some issues, but it's not issues to where I'm worried about it, because the closest thing that I can compare this to is if you followed the history of Doom 2016 coming to the Nintendo Switch 1, they had demos for that game, and the demo was really bad at conventions. People was reporting how Doom 2016 could be one of the worst games for the Switch, and by the time it released, it was clearly one of the best third-party games that has ever happened for the system. So I feel like history is kind of repeating itself with Elden Ring, because I'm just seeing all similarity stories with Elden Ring and Doom 2016 when it came to being on Switch 1. Not to mention, we also have handheld footage of Elden Ring, and it looks rough, but it doesn't look like a disaster that everyone was talking about. And I have played truly disaster games on the Switch 1 in terms of ports, and this is nothing like a disaster Switch 1 port. So I'm sure that this game is going to be way better by the time it releases, and will be fully optimized and have a locked frame rate. I don't know, it's from software, so people have talked about how they have a history of bad console ports, so either way, I definitely don't think it's going to be what was reported. It'll be way better than that. We got Suda51 in the news. He was talking very positive about the Nintendo Switch 2 as he was promoting his new game, Romeo is a Dead Man. And he talked about how he was eagerly wanting to get this game onto the Nintendo Switch 2. But he didn't say this, but I'm guessing he doesn't have a development kit, and that's why that this game isn't coming out day one with all the other platforms. So he's probably in the queue of trying to get a Nintendo Switch 2. So hopefully Nintendo does better and is able to get all these developers the switches that they need so they can have their games come to the system. And for our last story of the day, we have confirmation that Koei Tecmo will be at the Tokyo Game Show. But what they also confirmed with their confirmation of being there is that there's actually going to be a demo of Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. This is going to be the first time that there will be a playable demo of this game, and so we're really going to get a lot more footage of this within the next month. So I'm definitely very pumped. I'm also very pumped to see if this is going to be at a locked 60 frames per second, as the developer interview that Nintendo posted a few months ago kind of seemed like there was confirmation that this would be 60 FPS, but they didn't flat out say it, which is just exciting to see, as if you know the history of these games, is they've never been at a locked frame rate on Nintendo consoles before. So this one would be the first time that that's ever happened. Very pumped for this, and I hope that we get a release date soon, and I hope it still comes out this year, as there's a lot of people worried that something's going to get delayed into 2026, since Nintendo has so many games that's still supposed to come out this year. But we have no release dates, which hopefully whenever that direct happens, we get more confirmation on these release dates, as all we have is 2025. It's pretty annoying. Guys, that's everything I have for you. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on everything that we discussed below. Obviously, there's the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 news about a potential Switch 2 update happening. Not to mention, there's all the direct rumors. I expect that these direct rumors are going to continue getting worse each day. And don't be surprised if you get things that are like, yeah, I heard that this direct's going to be next week or this week. All this type of stuff. So it's going to be an interesting September. I definitely think that much, because these videos are going to get crazy with people talking about the directs. I hate direct rumors, especially over the last month. I feel like all of us need to kind of calm down on following these direct rumors, as we were clearly you know, if you know what I'm talking about, we know not to put stock into this stuff really much more, unless it's coming from someone like Nate the Hate. But guys, I've been talking for way too much. Make sure to backslash that subscribe button, like the video, check out the Twitter, Instagram, Discord, all that good stuff that's in the description below. Become a Monado Marine, $5 a month, and I will see you guys in the next video.